Hi there. Today we're going to tie the American pheasant tail nymph. This is a really great all-around pattern that represents a mayfly nymph. I'm going to tie this one in about a number 12 hook, but I would have these in size 10, probably all the way down to an 18 or 20 if you can manage to tie them that small. I'm going to use some brown. This is a 140 denier UTC dark brown thread, which is the equivalent of a 6/0 in other brands. You use the tie in the thread about one hook eye back from the eye. Just tie it in until you get down to the bend, and then snip off your tag end. Next thing we're going to add is some copper wire, and so we're going to use a small copper wire. Copper is pretty traditional, and you just want to put that on a little diagonal. You can always slip it back and forth to adjust the length so you don't waste too much, and just tie that in with nice tight wraps. You can leave the wire on the side that's closest to you. Now we're going to tie in some pheasant tail, and that's going to be the tail and the body of the fly. So you want to figure out which side of the pheasant tail has the longer barbs and use that, and you'll get the most efficiency out of it. And you're going to pull them straight off the barbs off of the main stem like this. Just pull them, and you can usually just pull them right off or snip them, and then they have these little curlies on the end. You want to get rid of those because they can sort of get stuck together and screw things up. So now you're just going to figure out if the tail fibers are aligned. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you want them pretty close. And you're going to measure the tail to be about 1/2 to 3/4 of the length of the hook shank. So you're going to just measure that and put that point in where you think it should go. And using a nice tight pinch wrap, just bind it down to the hook, and bind it down 2 or 3 times right at that same point where the copper wire comes off. You're going to leave your thread dangling there, but you're going to take one turn right behind the pheasant tail, and you'll see why in a second. So I'm going to grab the pheasant tail, and you can use your hackle pliers if it helps, and I'm going to just leave that thread right in front of my pheasant tail as I'm tying it in, and that's going to help keep it cinched up against the last wrap. Sometimes you can put a little twist in there if it's being a little unruly. Just take your time, and you're going to bind it up until you get to about 3/4 of the length of the fly. You can see towards the end, hackle pliers come in handy, but I usually give it a go without them. It's just one less tool to use. If the hackle's nice and long, you should be fine. So tie it down, give it a couple of nice tight turns, and then snip it off. We're always going to backtrack a little bit, so it's okay if you've tied it a little bit long. Now we want to do counter wraps with the copper wire, meaning you're going to tie in the opposite direction and try to put 6 to 7, depending on how big of a fly you're making, nice even wraps, and then tie it down, trying to get over that wire. There's a little trick for doing it backwards, but I'm just going to tie it down over it a little bit because I did tie it a little long, and come back to that 1/4 point right there. Now we can helicopter off that wire because it's pretty thin wire. You don't really need to use snips. And then we're going to build in our wing case. So just adjust your thread, let it hang to about that 1/3 to 1/4 point, and now we're going to grab some more pheasant tail. So now we're going to take a nice chunky piece of pheasant tail, I would say maybe even up to a dozen barbules, and same thing, you're going to snip off the curly bits there, all right, and get it all lined up so that the fibers are all lined up at the end, because these are going to be your wing. So this one piece is going to be our wing and our wing case. So the way we do this is we're going to measure the length from the back of the eye to the hook bend, and that's how long we want it. So that looks pretty good right there. And then see where my fingers are? That's our tie-in point, and I'm going to transfer that measurement to where my thread is. So we're going to do a couple nice wraps there, and then bind it down till you get to the back end of the eye, and then you can snip it off right there. Okay. The next thing we're going to use is some peacock herl. And so this is peacock herl that I have on the stem. You can buy it as strung herls where you just have little pieces, but I find the quality of this is much better than the strung herl. It's very buggy and looks great. So I'm just going to snip a couple of pieces right off of the stem and line up the tips. And the tips are pretty brittle, so I want to get rid of them. So I'm just going to snip off about 1 inch of the tips right there, and that's what I'm going to tie in. So now I'm going to back my thread up to that place where the wing case will start, and just tie them in with a couple of firm wraps. And just like we had the thread hanging where the pheasant tail was going to go in for the body, I'm going to use that thread to help that peacock herl stay in place and sort of guide it along with that thread. So maybe 4 or 5 good wraps, and then tie it off. Sometimes you can just break those off if they're thin, but I'm just going to take a little snip there. All right, now we're going to build our wing case and our wings at the same time. And so I'm going to take that bulk of pheasant tail and I'm going to spread it out a little bit with my thumb and take a nice tight pinch wrap to make a really nice wing case. Do a couple of turns and then take your thumb and push back with your thumbnail and spread it out. So twist it around a little bit, and what you're trying to do is split those fibers so they go on either side. And once you're satisfied with where they go, you're going to build up a little head just like that, and they should be about equally split on either side. I'm going to do a 4 or 5 turn whip finish. 2, 3, 4, 5, and the fly is built. You can take a little bit of head cement or UV cure. I'm going to use UV cure because it dries really fast, and I'm going to soak that in to the wing case and then put a little dab onto the threads, and that'll be suffice to keep it from unraveling when that big fish comes and bites it. And for the UV cure, you just hit it with an ultraviolet light for a few seconds, and that should really cure it up nicely. So it's not a complicated fly to make. It does take some practice. It's really trying to get the measurements right, you know, so you have the good proportions that you're looking for. And so practice, practice, practice. I would definitely do about at least a half a dozen of these at a time. By the time you get to your 6th one, they should be looking beautiful. So there you go, the American pheasant tail nymph.